It is very lovely to see so many people in the audience today and so many friends. I think this is a particularly exciting panel given that we've rarely had conversations around queerness, particularly in a white cube space like in IAF or within a white cube gallery space at all. And the premise of this conversation also is one that thankfully goes beyond a simple trope of representation saying we just need more queer artists to making a more sustainable dialogue around what does it mean to queer art, right? What does it mean to have queerness as practice? I'm going to start off with a question that is going to tie two very distinct themes together, which is how does queerness affect content and how does queerness affect form? And what are the registers that the three of you operate within? And I want to start off with you, Priya, because Priya has been terrified of the art world, has said that it is not her place to be, but has done the most spectacular work with Gaysi Family in scenes. And so I really want to know, Priya, because the content is queer, but how is the form queer as well? The way it's displayed, the way it's made accessible, the way it's consumed.
How we make what we make. The other aspect, and of course I'm going to forget a lot of my very important points today. But I think what informs the form is also how many people can fit into it, how many voices can we fit into whatever it is that we are making. And also just to kind of add to what you said, we do a lot more than zines, and I think what our form goes to is also the online space, because that's also while the zines while the zines do take up one part of what we do, I think the online space is something that we've been taking up quite a lot in the last few years, and that's where the accessibility again kind of comes into play, and how many people can be reached, because a lot of what we've been doing is how do we make conversations on gender and sexuality more mainstream. So that is what informs all the forms that we kind of take up. And of late, we've also been trying to explore public spaces. So what we recently did at Street Art India, where we painted a gender-neutral washroom. So that has been, I mean, we've received really great response over that. And that's how we've been trying to kind of, like, that as a queerness is also informed. Because I think for me, like, public art spaces have been something that I've been drawn to for a long time. And they don't exist in a bubble. So your online spaces still will be, your zines will be accessed by a limited few people, but how do you kind of make it every day is also, has been a part of the practice at Gaysi and personally as well. Yeah, I don't know if I've answered.
No, you have, because I think what's really amazing is that Gaysi also started off as a blog. I remember I wrote for Gaysi Analyst way back in the day, and I used to sort of refresh the website every day, seeing if there's a new article, because you were so starved for queer content. The blog is the form, and we should also, any of you have checked out Akhil Karam's blog, which is a phenomenal blog by a queer academic and activist and artist. It's an insight into ways of being that are not easily accessible in other spaces. Right? These are not sort of ways of being that you see publishers print.
And also I think language becomes a big part of how we have navigated all the work that we do as well. So design and art and illustrations become a large part of it, because you don't need for it to be read in a certain language. It is very much open in that sense, and one can connect to any kind of visual media a lot more quickly in some sense. So yeah, that's also there with the blogs as well. I think what is done is broaden it to we've taken, like, I think Gaysi stays quite far away from academia in some forms, I would say. So yeah, like how does like an everyday person who's not really coming from an informed space or is not engaging with it 100%, right? Ideally, when we make art, we want somebody to be like fully into it, but that's not often the case. Right? So then, still, how do you kind of get your point across? Still, how do you kind of engage with the people? I think is how our mediums are also influenced.
I want to turn to you, Aroh, because I think this is also a central sort of aspect of the work that you do. I think from the early days where you organize the Budget Arts Festival and sort of other interventions in a place like this, which sort of drew upon student activism, but also the idea of a festival, right? Your work has also bordered the intersection of queerness as content and form. So can you tell us a little more about how these sort of influences have come in and what are the sort of movements that you're in conversation with when you sort of choose the form that you want to present your work in?
I was just thinking even when like Priya was speaking and with your earlier question and the direction you want me to take. And for me, I would like to say, like, if anybody wants to hear about my practice, I would say that I don't know how to describe my practice, but I don't think that that's necessary. Like that's a bad place to be in. The reason I don't know how to talk about my practice is because there isn't been any predecessor for me or for literally any Dalit queer artist I know, the trajectories we take, to have a history. So in that sense, we are also doing the job of a historian and an archivist. Often we get, we go through, like most of the people I work with go through indignities that caste meets out to us. And so then you also have to be there, like, what a lot of people would bill as social work. But it's just work which was unacknowledged. You have to, of course, do your job as an artist and do these festivals and in my projects we basically have both kinds of registers. We have ephemeral ones and we have permanent ones. Festivals will fall into the ephemeral, like we do performances or poetry circle or so on. And then there's more like fixed registers of like developing a book together or having a website together, for example, as a publication. But for me, it's about having to do these multiple roles at the same time and to be able to rescue joy and provide moments of relief from the everydayness of caste and queerness. So there is no one template, there is no one trajectory. And when I was in fact doing this, I was doing it with a lot of resistance, like we did a festival in those spaces, in those public spaces and universities, because it was not happening. And today when I see so many people doing it, I might not do it. That's how queerness works. I might not do it, but in that point and in that space it was really important. Yeah. I hope I've answered something.
You have to have a 30-second elevator pitch where India, how are you going to sell a work at a booth otherwise? Chathuri, I want to turn to you along similar lines, right? I think we've had a little bit of a conversation around the sort of erasure of queerness in your practice back in Sri Lanka and a sort of greater focus on it when you exhibit internationally or even in India. How has this sort of process of confronting your queerness in a space where it's marginalized affected both the form and the content? What are those terrains that you navigate?
First of all, I would like to say that as you see the slides are moving, the work, when I represent something about queer perspective, it does not mean that I am only representing only about queerness. Because if you see, Sri Lanka is within South Asian context is a very volatile space, and right now we are also going through a huge political turmoil, and there is really an ethnic conflict and war. So, as you see that the work is layering that queer perspective within that kind of sphere, and speaking about how do we have a conversation about queerness when there is this kind of animosity around you, because what you are is considered as who you are is considered so minimal within there's a larger picture that is happening around you when you're already censored, when you're always under a radar of being vocal about something that is against oppression. You're constantly under that suppression. So I try to bring that within my work also, and when I have a conversation, the best thing that we happened, I have told Charlene as well, that last year we had our first public pride walk. It doesn't mean that we didn't have it. It was always in some seclusion or in a privileged, accessible space. And for the first time, when we are having this huge recession going on, the state is going bonkers, its military has increased, even right now there are protests going on, and people are struggling over daily wages to hunger. There was an initiation, energy, there was an initiation, an energy to actually speak about that we were also not spoken, like we were not there as a community. They were the queer community. Why they did was also to discuss and say that we are also against this oppression and suppression that is happening in this country and it is happening in South Asia. We are also being vocal throughout a time period from the 70s to 80s that you vocalized, and this was the time just to show publicly that no, now we are all together and now we are going to move for a new revolution. So I think that's it. I would like to say.
And that actually ties in very well into our sort of next key, which is the idea of queerness as being produced in community. So queer practice is essentially driven by community engagements. I think what's really funny is I've met most of the people on the stage and people in this rooms in the most diverse set of circumstances, right? At parties, getting people out of jail, sort of getting fundraisers for binders, like doing COVID relief work. You know, these are all just such strange settings that you get put in together. And queer people sort of create communities in very different ways, including through art forms. Ikram is here and gives the most lovely sarees. So, you know, how does the active community affect and impact the work that you engage in? And I again want to sort of build upon this because, you know, the Gaysi Bazaar is a mela, right? It's like the biggest mela in Bombay. Everyone's there. It's sort of got a very similar setup to an art fair, but a very different aesthetic, a very different kind of joy. So what does it mean to create within a community? And what are also the challenges I want to sort of focus on? So anyone wants to?
Since you mentioned so as far as the challenge, that's really the thing that the bigger conversation among says. That the challenge is to talk, that challenge, money is the challenge. But also I think just to talk about Zine Bazaar, what if we've been kind of focusing on is how do we give a platform for queer voices. Zine Bazaar is more for anybody and everybody. It is not a queer focused space, but because it's organized by Gaysi, this year we've had, I think, close to like 40% queer people as a part of Zine Bazaar. So, I mean, the aim of Zine Bazaar has also been to create, again, accessibility becomes one part of it, and money becomes one part of it, right? Because we try to kind of keep it at a very nominal, as much of a minimal cost as it can be for artists, and hence kind of make a space where they can talk about their work, they can share their work, they can sell their work outside of Instagram, and it also again brings out the community aspect because so many times we're just like behind our screens. So Zine Bazaar becomes like a mini meetup for everybody who follows each other's work. They get to engage. Yeah, I've forgotten your question, so can you repeat?
About the challenges of creating within community and also why community is important in the sort of work.
Here I think community becomes important because how else do we kind of reach out to different people? So one thing that we kind of keep at heart when we are curating for Zine Bazaar is making sure there's the ones who have been in this space for long are present also, but the newer ones, the newer voices, the younger voices are also present in the room. And also within that, like it goes into smaller decisions like who's sitting next to each other at the Zine Bazaar, right? Then how does that, how each other's communities also then help the person sitting next to you. So just kind of these decisions is something that we kind of is how we take care of our and build the community that we're trying to build with Zine Bazaar and Gaysi to always keep balance or at least strive for as much of a balance as we can. The other challenges are mostly logistical as opposed to anything else, I think. Yeah, those are thoughts for now.
Chathuri, I want to turn to you as well and ask you, you spoke about the lack of community initially in your early days in Sri Lanka, and then you were based in India for a bit.
Yeah.
And you got involved in transnational queer communities. You sort of jumped into the 377 protest, had some experiences there as a sort of foreign national protesting on the streets. So tell me a little more about how does this sort of idea of queerness also allow you to find community outside, like when you're not in a space that you feel like is your own?
I think that, as I said, it was not quite easy. I was trying. There are certain social groups and entities that are there that are running spaces. I do not want to mention anyone so that I will miss others. Because I also work alongside with some of these community groups, working on new projects. The thing is, first, when you reframe the question and the whole panel, we are talking about the visibility as well. And within my practice, and the art world, it's not so enlarged. But the first thing that I came across was finding that inclusion within my own family, actually, because I did not have, and I think that turmoil also, and as you see in the slides, that's actually my mother. And when I was working with her, it was also about that, inclusion of who I am. She needs to also understand who I am, beyond also what is happening with the social political, like her identity as well, because I see the matriarchal system, and there's questions about that, and also the ethnic conflict. And then I was trying to find the visibility of our community. Why am I not part of the history? Why am I not, my identity is so not registered? And that was the time I was working at, Shalini was introducing my mentor. I've been doing on traditional craft. It's a way of ritualistic performances people would use to see in Sri Lanka, these demon masks wearing people. It's actually connected with the whole islanders going back to the Rakshasas and then, the Ramayana narrative, if I can say. But within this ritualistic performance, it is intergenerationally, it's cisgendered men that is passed on from father to son. And so both my mentors are like, they are the last. And it's father to son. And now it's just me suddenly dropped in and wanted to learn something. And it was not, I'm still an outsider to learn just one part of that branch, the textile form. And then when I slowly, gradually learned through that, is that it's such beautifully interpreted in cultural identity and history about gender. You saw these sculptures and little beads, and the immediate thing about textile, about all this is like the ornamentation. It's a blink to your eye. But actually within that ritual, they're talking about the soul. They're talking about the soul does not have a gender. It is so neutral. It's an energy, a form that is actually traveling. So what are we actually talking about? This is an acceptance about queerness. That accept us for who we are. Don't define us by categorization. Don't define us for who we are not. So I think I was searching for belonging. I was searching for marks of my community. And then later on, I'm now trying to make it more accessible, these traditional art forms, actually to the community, which is still preliminary steps. But it is just difficult because you're actually breaking a format of cultural tradition. So everyone obviously is going to feel like, okay, this person is trying to do something controversial. This is not acceptable. You are making questions about a 400, 500-year-old cultural identity or technique. It is not that. I'm trying to make facts what perhaps you might have interpreted that history, that tradition in a different manner. What if we start looking in a different point of view? What if we start looking bodies in a different point of view, rather than seeing what is being given to us, the perspective, the mirror. So yeah.
And Aroh, finally I want to turn to you because I was in conversation with Shilpa Gupta for the launch of her book, For In Your Tongue I Cannot Fit, which is about imprisoned poets. And we were sort of struggling with how do you understand this idea of artists as going beyond the arts and sort of being involved in movements, also sort of taking on roles beyond what can be sort of narrowly defined as art. And there was a sort of idea of expansion that was thrown around, but we settled on something far deeper, which I think was seepage, which is this idea that the art influences social movements despite rather than because of, right? Despite the structures that prevent it from becoming a force in this space. So I want to actually also turn to you, Aroh, and say, what are the pitfalls of community, right? Is community always supportive? Is community always enabling? What are the sort of ways in which you navigate community? And where are the ways in which queerness in and of itself is not enough?
I mean, because you nudged me to tell myself, I just might. Because also I was thinking of challenges, right? I mean, who to hire than a person, and mostly in my experience, there are people, who's doing so many roles at the same job, who's having to be a historian, who's having to be a journalist, who's having to be an anthropologist, who's having to be a social worker, a community organizer, at the same time to achieve what other people can do without. And so for me, I feel having an undescribable practice is selling, and that's what sells. And the other bit would be like just looking at like everyday queerness and like how Dalit people are not held back by challenges at all. Like in my experience at work, they're not held back by challenges, but rather I see them every day transforming the challenges, and they have immense challenges. As a community, we face immense challenges. And then who to hire than people who are transforming challenges and working their way around the system. As for the art bit, I would say that, I mean, like art world across the world, like the art in itself is undemocratic and has been so across the world. It's a legacy that we have inherited. But then I would not want to create art alone. That would be a very sad premise. I would rather be in community than create art, but that's not a choice anybody faces, because I mean, as far I have not faced it, so like I would want to create art in community. I would prioritize art that salvages life over consumption. And this whole idea of how we look at art as something that needs to be made rather than something that exists is something I like to challenge and push. Yeah, and when you do that, you also realize that art, like just living and evolving as living, is also art. And so it's great that this time India Art Fair has the biggest contingent of contemporary Dalit artists. But I'm sure in the previous editions as well, the labor of Dalit people has always been there to make events such as this possible. And art for me is to be able to have a conversation between both.
Fantastic. I'm going to end on one sort of contentious question, which is, we're in a white cube gallery space, we're at India Art Fair. One of the biggest conversations that's been happening at India Art Fair this year, but more broadly in the contemporary art space, is what happens when forms like street art, forms like queer art enter the white cube gallery, right? Is it possible to create art within the white cube gallery space? And then the other conversation happening is, if everyone is selling their soul, then why should queer people be denied the right to sell their soul? We must all have equal opportunity. And so I'd love to get your thoughts on this. What happens? And Chathuri, I'd love to start with you because you are a sort of white cube gallery artist. And what constraints does that face? And do you think there are sort of ways to rupture that space from within?
Yeah. First of all, you throw me to crocodiles. Yeah. Okay. See, I create. and and if you go and ask any artist over there who's exhibiting, would be saying that, okay, we create and then we have a sustainable income to like make ourselves liberal and go here and there. As I said, when you started a question, you said that when we have this conversation that I am not accepted within the art world, which is from where I come from. And because of that art world, somewhere I have made internationally some sort of identity, had given me the liberty to be here at this moment than many other artists and probably people who are there back there than them. Um, some of them look up to me and I say that how could you sell your soul or whatever you can say. It's not. They're valuing me, I'm getting what I get. But then I also portray what I wanted to say. I'm not, as you see, I'm not like a person who's going to stop what I'm saying. If I have to speak out, I speak out. My work also speaks out. But I just want to say is that when someone contextualizes my work, yes, up to now, the context of queer identity has always been so hidden because I speak more than that itself. I speak about the sculptures were actually about the Easter bomb attack that happened a few years ago, and there were some of them were the original ones. From there, it was showcased here in India. I had the privilege to show it in India, back in Sri Lanka, because obviously it would be like censored and I might be arrested or I don't know what might happen to me. But the fact is that it gives me a sense of creating my own voice. I mean, they could have censored the work. I mean, in a white space like this, half nudity. I mean, I don't think that could be possible. But I was a bit shocked, astonished that they gave that, without censoring, they gave that possibility to even showcase some of these performances because, I mean, when I show them in Sri Lanka, the backlash that comes with it is a very, it's terrible. And then when you are queer, the first thing they're like, are you sure that the work you do is queer? How can you define that?
But this is really interesting because I think queerness also allows you to have a certain subversive potential, right? In my sort of curatorial practice, for me what's been interesting is the ways in which queerness allows me to explore things like the idea of permanence in the archive, or the idea of this sort of repeated trope of sab yaad rakha jayega, which would not otherwise find space in a gallery because it's labeled as queer, right? So the ways in which sort of queerness allows you to navigate themes that otherwise get politically censored, the ways in which again queerness seeps into and becomes a tool through which you can have conversations that would not otherwise be possible. So I want to ask you this, Aroh, what are the conversations that have been made possible through queerness that perhaps would not have been able to be had otherwise? And what are those sort of intersections and contours that you've been able to explore through a sort of queer practice that would not be possible?
I think just the fact that I think queerness is an experiment with language. Like I really think that, and it can be any kind of language. Like it can be body language, it can be spoken language, and for me, what makes it possible is to be able to read language in many ways, and that's what queerness comes down to for me. And this might sound cliche because you also asked the question of how to, what gets to be in these white places. I feel like a lot of things I said earlier touched on what ultimately ends up being there and what I would imagine to be there. But my less than 30-second reply to it would be this Prakash Jha film ka song ka lyric, which is like ek chance to de de meri jaan fir udaan dekhna. And it can be said for queers. It's originally a cliche put on Dalit people, but now everybody is saying it. There's an inclusion lab. And I think it can happen.
Fantastic. And lastly, over to you, Priya. Priya, you did a fabulous work for us in collaboration for Pinkless Sky during the pandemic. Are we going to see that work hanging in a White Cube gallery space anytime soon?
Well, I hope so. I think
Galleries in the audience, many galleries.
I actually, just to respond to your question, I think there should be a balance of two things. One, people selling their soul and being in the space. Where people selling their soul, it's okay. Like, I think you need both of it as well. And the other is, I think, what Chathuri has been doing so as well, that you be in the space and you take up and you push, keep pushing. I think somewhere you need a little bit of both, because otherwise if we just keep waiting for that chance to be able to push and be here and then have all of conversations, the movement will be a little bit slower. So I think in any way and every way that you can get in, I would say that that's how I see being in these kind of spaces. And Gaysi's, I mean, if I were to look at it as Gaysi's work, gallery spaces is one place where I've been wanting to have a presence, wanting us to have a presence, and for queer people to have like a very dedicated presence, and not even as something that, okay, there is one queer artist out of many, like 50, 100 of them. So yeah, that's one thing. But just to kind of go back to, so the whole selling your soul point, I think, and about building communities and building spaces, I think that's where that's something that we have to navigate a whole lot on a daily basis, becomes a personal issue and a dilemma as well, is how do you kind of be in the mainstream, how do you keep making art, how do you have more like meaningful conversations that go beyond just coming out and bring in intersectionality, bring in diversity, is when we work with brands, is when we, because that also becomes a way in which, I mean, I don't see it as just brand campaigns. We are still creating art in some sense. We are collaborating. It is never in isolation. So for Gaysi, the white Q spaces become the brand campaigns, it become the brand collaborations that we do, or how we exist online in more than the very metaphorical ways, right? Because I think that's where we've existed, that's where we're pushing, and some may call it as selling our soul, but we also see it as taking up that space and making sure that we have the right conversations with the right sensibilities in all of these spaces. So I think we should go for all of it. We have to be everywhere, is what I would say.
On that note, we have a phenomenal round of applause for all three of our incredible speakers today. Put your money where your mouth is. Everyone listening, support their work, support it monetarily, support it by sharing their work.
Give us all the money, please.
Give them all the money. Anyone sponsors listening over here, exhibitors in the art fair. We have a little bit of time for some audience questions. We have 5 minutes. So if I can take 3 questions from the audience at one time, and then we'll sort of distribute them amongst our wonderful panel here and get them to answer before Shali yells me off stage. Yes?
First of all, thank you guys. I'm actually quite excited that last time I sat in a panel discussing purely about class on sensibility as festival, and we are here after almost editing every edition of India Fair, finally talking about Dalit artists and queer on a scale of this scope, and also to see a lot of artists being represented. So I just want to share with you the same sentiment that I'm glad that it's happening and the way I hope kind of unfolds into ripples. One of the things that I wanted to speaking about whether, and this is no by definition of queerness, but for me my own limited understanding was a space where there is no category. And I think, and a lot of people misunderstand queer as a category, but it's actually the kind of the same space that there are no categories that are thrown onto you and you kind of somewhere free flow. I just wanted to kind of guys to respond to that.
Fantastic. Any other questions?
Hi, it was a really nice talk. I had a question about, so as writers and artists, we are a lot of time put up with the question of why do we attach our identity before our work. So me being a writer, I'm always questioned that why do you put yourself as a queer writer? So has these sort of questions come into you, and how do you overcome these questions in conversations? Yeah, just that.
Thank you. And the last question is, anyone have a burning question that you want to ask? Okay, fantastic. So let's take those 2 questions and come to you. The first being around queerness as a lack of categories, the erasure of categories. And the second one as why is it important to identify as queer or as Dalit or as any identity in your sort of artistic practice, and what are the sort of challenges that come with it? I'll start with that second one firstly and say that it is also a challenge of the medium you work with, right? You get slotted in. If you're in a space, you have a roster of artists, you sort of slot them into different themes that they're working on, different sort of identities that they come from, and you've seen the sort of commercialization and sort of marketing of identity, right? Which goes beyond your individual need to sort of align with or present as a particular identity. So that's a sort of personal navigation where you have to know the structures that are against you and the ways that you're being started in, and actively resist as well. And there's really no easy solution. You kind of have to keep doing what you do, and eventually, fingers crossed, hope that that work will find its way and find its space in the world the way it's meant to be seen.
But just to kind of add to that, I think the reason why at least and that's something that I've been also questioning for a long time now, but it goes back to what we were discussing about, right? That how does queerness inform our practice? So I think when we do attach very consciously these, a queer feminist writer, is you are also somewhere conveying that this is an identity that does somewhere influence in literal or not so literal ways. It's not that it's always present and you're writing or illustrating about queerness, but it does, the queerness does become such a large part in how we go through our lives, right? There is so much questioning that's involved, there's so much reflection that comes in with queerness. So it may not always be the subject of your writing, but it still does influence it, and hence I think to add that before your work is always a nice thing, because you are saying that this is something that is a part of me, and hence comes in many different ways into my work.
I think I'll just answer the both of them together, which is that like queerness for me is work. Like when I'm saying that where I'm actually like working around it, so maybe that's something one to think about. Like if you're identifying as a queer writer, I'm really queer in the writing. And who does it help? You know, who are you writing for? That's how I began. But another example of how queerness allows us to play with language and read it differently would be, yes, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, so many gender theorists have said it that, you know, like, we need to, like, there needs to be a society where ultimately gender doesn't matter, right? And if it will not matter, then it will not exist the way. But what is commonsensical to largely a Dalit, you know, like, academic, or literally like a lot of that, it doesn't have to be even an academic, like even it's like common community knowledge, is that if gender is not going to exist, then I mean like caste also doesn't have to exist, because it's a caste patriarchy, right? So any imagination of a casteless future would also be a genderless future. So why is it that we want to invest in one and not the other? Why do we hesitate? Yeah.
Let me get back into this law and then yours. When I think about my practice, the queerness becomes how I observe, okay? And it does not totally recognize who I am, but it is part of me. That is why I am observing certain press, pick up a certain material, or when you write something, maybe that is totally different from it. Perhaps because of that identity within you. Perhaps the way that you are feeling you to talk about that, because not only that, because it is necessary that you are living in that, within that framework that is being put on you. And when I am also speaking about it, I'm not, when you ask who am I would be like, I'm just me. But then there's so many layers of me being queer, Sinhalese, in a country where I am the majority and I am doing like the whole ethnic violence towards people, and there's so much volatile space. There's more picture to it that I'm speaking about, and then finding who I am. So those become layers to your work. You understand? It's become the layer. It's not totally you are. You don't have to feel the burden of being that. It just layers how you see and observe things around you. And then about platforms. Yes, there are so many platforms, and we observe that Indian Art Fair has some of the artists' performances that I've been seeing for a few years publicly queer artists that is being, and there's a conversation about it. But also, I think we had this conversation, I don't want to point it out. Yes, being queer is a celebration, but what are we also celebrating apart from that is also questionable. Because it is not just that, it is not just celebrating the queerness, but there's more to it. More observing all of the structures around us, more observation of the political issues, what is happening around us is important as well, and that gives that leap. So it is not just a celebration, it's a new visionary, it's a new perspective of visioning and a future. So I think that is something that has to and is coming gradually within platforms like this. So yeah.
Thank you so much. I think it's been queerness as seepage, queerness as solidarity, and most importantly, queerness as praxis. I'm going to take the last 10 seconds that I have here to push a pet project of mine, particularly since we are in Delhi. I urge you and implore all of you, as Delhi starts getting warmer and warmer, to please start wearing shorts to art galleries. I should say this at India Art Fair. You get judged a lot for wearing shorts in art galleries, and I think we need to normalize that a lot more. Coming from Bombay, it baffles me why somebody would be wearing like full pants and maybe sometimes a blazer to a gallery opening in Delhi. So this is how queerness should disrupt the space. So I urge you and implore you that queerness is practiced and everyone here is wearing shorts to art galleries. And on that note, thank you so much everyone. Thank you.